What if the myths whispered around ancient campfires weren't just tales of gods and monsters, but something far more extraordinary? Picture this: every legend, every sacred symbol, every celestial alignment in ancient stories might have been a carefully crafted vessel for scientific knowledge. Think about the pyramids of Egypt, their precise angles mirroring the stars, or the Greek myth of Asclepius, where serpents symbolized healing long before modern medicine understood their venom's medicinal properties. These aren't mere coincidences, they're clues hidden in plain sight, waiting to be deciphered. For centuries, we've dismissed myths as fantastical stories, but what if they were actually the textbooks of their time? Ancient cultures didn't have journals or labs. They had oral traditions, symbols, and rituals to pass down their understanding of the world. The Norse believed the sun was chased by a wolf, a poetic way to describe solstices. The Hindu epic Mahabharata details weapons that sound eerily like advanced technology. Even the Aboriginal Dreamtime stories encode navigation techniques and ecological wisdom. These weren't just stories, they were survival guides, astronomical charts, and scientific archives rolled into one. So why does this matter to us today? Because unraveling these connections isn't just about solving historical puzzles, it's about rediscovering a lost way of seeing the world. Our ancestors viewed science and spirituality as intertwined, not separate. They understood patterns in nature, the movement of stars, the properties of plants, and they wove that knowledge into their myths to ensure it would endure. Today, we're just beginning to peel back the layers of their brilliance. By the end of this journey, you'll never look at mythology the same way again. These stories are more than folklore, they're a testament to human ingenuity, a bridge between the ancient and the modern, waiting for us to cross. Long before libraries or textbooks, humanity relied on something far more enduring: stories told under starlight, repeated around hearths, etched into the collective memory of entire cultures. Take the Greek myth of Demeter and Persephone, where a mother's grief plunges the world into winter until her daughter returns each spring. On the surface, it's a tale of love and loss, but beneath that lies a brilliant agricultural lesson: the reason crops wither and revive with the seasons. This wasn't just poetry, it was a survival manual disguised as a bedtime story. Consider how the Dogon people of West Africa preserved astonishingly precise astronomical knowledge about Sirius, the brightest star in our sky. Their oral traditions described Sirius as part of a binary star system, a fact modern telescopes only confirmed in the 19th century. How did they know? Their myth spoke of a tiny, dense companion star orbiting Sirius, invisible to the naked eye yet crucial to their cosmology. This wasn't guesswork, it was meticulous observation passed down through generations, wrapped in symbolism to protect it from being lost or forgotten. Even healing practices found refuge in myth. The serpent coiled around the staff of Asclepius, the Greek god of medicine, wasn't just a symbol, it was a clue. Ancient physicians observed that snake venom in controlled doses could numb pain or even halt bleeding. That knowledge became legend, then sacred iconography, surviving millennia until modern pharmacology rediscovered its truth. What's truly remarkable is how these stories transcended geography. From the Aboriginal songlines mapping Australia's vast deserts to the Norse myths predicting eclipses as the wolf skull chasing the sun, cultures separated by oceans arrived at the same conclusion: the best way to safeguard knowledge was to make it unforgettable. They turned data into drama, equations into epics, and now, as we piece together these hidden connections, we're not just decoding myths, we're reclaiming an ancient language of wisdom, one where every constellation, every flood story, every trickster's tale holds a key to understanding the genius of those who came before us. The stars were more than just lights in the sky to ancient civilizations. They were chapters in a cosmic storybook, written in constellations and passed down through generations. Take Orion, the mighty hunter of Greek myth. His belt of 3 bright stars didn't just inspire tales of heroism, they served as a celestial clock. When Orion rose in the winter sky, farmers knew it was time to prepare for planting. His appearance was as reliable as any almanac, a silent signal woven into the fabric of legend. Half a world away, the Maya saw the same stars but told a different story. In the Popol Vuh, their sacred text, the hero twins Hunahpu and Xbalanque journey through the underworld, their adventures mirroring the movements of Venus and the Sun. Modern astronomers have found that these myths align with precise astronomical events, like Venus's 8-year cycle. The Maya didn't just observe the heavens, they encoded their knowledge in narrative, turning myths into mathematical records. Even the pyramids of Egypt whisper secrets of the stars. The shafts inside the Great Pyramid point directly to Orion's belt and the pole star Thuban, which guided ancient navigators. These aren't accidental alignments, they're deliberate, a way to anchor earthly structures to the heavens. The pyramids weren't just tombs, they were 3-dimensional star maps, ensuring the pharaohs could find their way in the afterlife. What's fascinating is how universal this practice was. From the Polynesians, who navigated vast oceans by memorizing star paths as part of their oral traditions, to the Babylonian Enuma Elish, where the god Marduk organizes the chaos of the cosmos into orderly constellations, myths served as the original astronomy textbooks. They transformed complex celestial patterns into memorable stories, ensuring the knowledge survived even when written records didn't. Now, imagine standing in the shadow of these ancient monuments or listening to these stories under a sky unpolluted by modern light. The myths suddenly make sense not as fantasies, but as sophisticated tools for understanding the universe. They remind us that science and storytelling were once inseparable, 2 sides of the same coin. And as we decode these celestial narratives, we're not just uncovering lost knowledge, we're rediscovering a way of seeing the world that's as profound as it is poetic. This brings us to the architectural wonders that physically embody this celestial wisdom. If myths were the textbooks, then temples, pyramids, and standing stones were the chalkboards, monuments built to last, designed to teach, and aligned with the rhythms of the cosmos. Pyramids and temples across the ancient world share something remarkable. They weren't just built to impress, but to communicate. The Great Pyramid's base perimeter divided by its height gives us pi, while its sides align with the cardinal directions with near-perfect precision. How did a civilization without modern tools achieve this? The answer might lie in the myths themselves. Egyptian texts speak of Thoth, the god of wisdom, gifting humanity with sacred measurements. The Maya credited their architectural mastery to Kukulkan, the feathered serpent who descended with knowledge of mathematics and astronomy. These weren't just divine legends, they were origin stories for engineering breakthroughs. Look closer at the geometry. The pyramid's angles mirror the Earth's latitude. Their chambers resonate with acoustic properties still studied today, and their corridors align with solstice sunrises. In Mesoamerica, the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan repeats the same mathematical ratios found in Egyptian structures, despite oceans separating the cultures. Coincidence unlikely. Both civilizations encoded their understanding of space, time, and harmony into stone, using myth as the blueprint. Sacred geometry reveals even deeper connections. The flower of life symbol, found in Egyptian temples and Celtic ruins alike, contains the patterns of creation from the orbits of planets to the structure of DNA. Hindu mandalas, Islamic tilework, and Gothic cathedrals all share this hidden language of shapes, proving that ancient builders saw numbers as divine. Plato called geometry the language of the gods, and these monuments are its grammar. What's truly fascinating is how these structures still teach us. Modern physicists study pyramid energy, architects adapt their ventilation systems, and mathematicians decode their proportions. The myths warned us all along these weren't just tombs or temples, but libraries in stone, waiting for humanity to grow wise enough to read them. The healing secrets of the ancient world weren't locked away in laboratories, they were hidden in plain sight, woven into the very myths we've dismissed as mere stories. Take Odin, the Norse god who hung himself from the world tree for 9 nights to gain wisdom. This wasn't just a dramatic tale, it mirrors real shamanic rituals where psychoactive plants like Amanita muscaria mushrooms were used to induce visions. The so-called mead of poetry he sought, likely a metaphor for the mind-altering brews that opened doors to knowledge our ancestors couldn't explain any other way. Then there's Asclepius, the Greek god whose temples doubled as early hospitals. Patients would sleep in his sanctuaries, believing the god visited them in dreams with cures. But this wasn't just blind faith. These incubation rituals were carefully designed therapies. The priests used herbs like opium for pain relief, while the temple's serene environment and rhythmic chanting reduced stress, boosting the body's natural healing. Modern medicine now recognizes what they knew instinctively. The mind plays a powerful role in recovery. Even the humble willow bark, mentioned in Babylonian clay tablets as a remedy for pain, contains salicin, the natural compound that gave us aspirin. The Aztecs used yarrow to staunch wounds, a practice validated by its clotting properties. Indigenous cultures from the Amazon to the Arctic passed down plant knowledge through stories, ensuring survival. When the Cherokee spoke of Selu, the corn mother, they weren't just telling a creation myth, they were encoding agricultural and medicinal wisdom, like using corn silk for kidney ailments. Alchemy, often dismissed as primitive chemistry, carried this legacy forward. The mythical philosopher's stone wasn't just about turning lead into gold, it symbolized the transformation of illness into health. Ancient texts describe distillation processes that isolated essential oils from plants, their magical properties later proven as antiseptics or anti-inflammatories. The caduceus, that serpent-entwined staff we associate with medicine today, traces back to Hermes, the messenger god who bridged worlds just as alchemists sought to bridge the gap between nature's secrets and human understanding. What's striking is how these myths anticipated modern science. The Egyptian Ebers Papyrus, a 3,500-year-old medical text, prescribes garlic for heart health, a remedy now known to reduce cholesterol. Chinese legends of the herb ephedra, used for millennia to treat asthma, led to the discovery of ephedrine in modern bronchodilators. These stories weren't superstition. They were observational science wrapped in narrative, ensuring life-saving knowledge survived wars, famines, and the rise and fall of empires. As we peel back the layers of these medicinal myths, we're not just uncovering ancient cures, we're rediscovering a holistic approach that viewed the body, mind, and natural world as interconnected. Today's researchers are returning to these traditions, studying rainforest plants from tribal lore for new antibiotics or analyzing Viking, berserker potions for clues to neurological treatments. The line between myth and medicine blurs, revealing a truth our ancestors understood. Sometimes the most profound wisdom comes dressed as a story, waiting for the right moment to be heard again. Alchemy wasn't just about turning lead into gold. It was a grand metaphor for transformation, both of metals and the human spirit. Think of the mythical philosopher's stone said to grant immortality. This wasn't mere fantasy, it echoed across cultures, from China's Taoist quest for the elixir of life to the Hindu soma, a divine nectar promising eternal youth. These stories shared a deeper truth, the desire to conquer decay and unlock hidden potential. The alchemists' furnaces and flasks were their laboratories, but their language was pure poetry, serpents swallowing their tails representing endless cycles, or the union of sun and moon symbolizing chemical reactions. Take the legendary emerald tablet, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, with its cryptic phrase, "as above, so below." This wasn't just mystical jargon. It hinted at the fundamental principle of correspondence, the idea that patterns in the cosmos mirror those in the microscopic world. Centuries later, scientists would discover fractal geometry and quantum physics, revealing universal symmetries that alchemists had sensed but couldn't yet prove. Their dragons weren't monsters, they were metaphors for volatile substances, their fiery breath representing the release of energy during reactions. Even their colors told a story. The negrito, or blackening stage, symbolized decay, the breakdown of matter before rebirth. Albedo, the whitening, marked purification, while rubedo, the reddening, signaled completion. These stages mirrored the cycles of nature, night and day, death and renewal. Modern chemists still use similar processes today, from distillation to crystallization, though we've swapped allegory for equations. What's truly fascinating is how alchemy bridged myth and method. When an alchemist spoke of the marriage of sulfur and mercury, they weren't describing fantasy, they were documenting the combination of two elements central to their experiments. The mythical Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, wasn't just a symbol of eternity. It depicted the closed systems of distillation, where vapors rise, condense, and return, purifying substances with each cycle. This brings us to creation myths, where the line between cosmology and storytelling blurs even further. From the Babylonian Enuma Elish to the Aboriginal Dreamtime, these narratives didn't just explain origins, they mapped the universe. The Hindu Rigveda speaks of a golden womb floating in cosmic waters, uncannily resembling modern theories of a singularity before the Big Bang. The Maori described the separation of Rangi and Papa, sky and earth, echoing the formation of celestial bodies. These weren't primitive guesses, they were intuitive understandings of cosmic order, wrapped in the only language that could endure millennia, myth. By seeing alchemy and creation stories as more than superstition, we uncover a profound truth: our ancestors were scientists in their own right, using symbols and stories to preserve knowledge they couldn't yet measure. Their myths were the original peer-reviewed journals, their rituals the first experiments, and as we decode their wisdom, we realize something extraordinary. The boundaries between science and legend were never as clear as we thought. Mathematics and myth have always danced together, hidden in the patterns of nature and the rhythms of the cosmos. The Babylonians didn't just worship the number 60, they built their entire counting system around it, giving us 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. But why? Look to their mythology, where 60 was sacred to Anu, the sky god, representing cosmic order. This wasn't arbitrary. It reflected their observations of the heavens, where the movement of stars divided neatly into 60ths. Even the Greek Pythagoras, often called the father of numbers, believed mathematics was divine, tracing musical harmonies back to ratios and claiming the universe itself vibrated with numerical perfection. Then there's the Fibonacci sequence, a mathematical marvel where each number is the sum of the two before it, creating a spiral found in sunflowers, seashells, and galaxies. But long before Fibonacci, this pattern appeared in Hindu hymns to Vishnu, describing the infinite unfolding of creation. The ancient Sanskrit text Vedanga Jyotisha didn't just track planetary motion, it encoded astronomical calculations in poetic meter, turning math into mantra. These weren't separate disciplines, they were two sides of the same coin, one logical, the other lyrical. Consider the Mandelbrot set, a dizzyingly complex fractal that repeats infinitely at every scale. Modern computers visualize its swirling patterns, but the concept echoes the Norse myth of Yggdrasil, the world tree whose branches stretch into endless realms. Both describe a universe where the same shapes repeat, from the microscopic to the cosmic. Even the Mayan number 0, represented by a shell glyph, wasn't just a placeholder. It symbolized the void from which all things emerged, mirroring their creation myth of the gods speaking existence out of nothingness. What's astonishing is how these numerical myths transcend time. The Chinese I Ching, an ancient divination system, uses 64 hexagrams binary combinations of broken and unbroken lines that foreshadowed modern computer code by millennia. The Egyptian god Thoth, scribe of the gods, didn't just invent writing. His hieroglyphs included precise measurements for building pyramids, turning myth into engineering. So when we study these ancient numerical traditions, we're not just uncovering old math tricks. We're glimpsing a world view where numbers were alive, pulsing through stories and stone, connecting the tangible to the transcendent. The next time you glance at a clock or admire a seashell, remember, you're not just seeing numbers or nature. You're witnessing the legacy of myths that turned the universe into a story waiting to be decoded. Numbers weren't just tools for counting to ancient cultures. They were living symbols woven into the very fabric of their myths. Take the Pythagorean theorem, celebrated as a Greek discovery, yet the so-called Egyptian triangle of 3-4-5 proportions appears in the myth of Osiris, where his dismembered body is reassembled in 14 pieces, a number echoing lunar cycles and sacred geometry. This wasn't coincidence, it was a mathematical metaphor for resurrection, where precise ratios mirrored cosmic order. The theorem didn't need to be written in a textbook when it could be preserved in a story about death and rebirth, ensuring every generation would remember its power. Across the world, the Fibonacci sequence emerges in even more surprising places. Hindu temples like the Hoysala in India arrange their pillars and carvings in spirals matching the sequence's 1-1-2-3-5 pattern, mirroring the unfurling of a sacred lotus or the arms of the god Shiva in cosmic dance. The Jain text Tiloyapanati describes the universe as a series of concentric rings, their dimensions following Fibonacci-like progressions. These weren't artistic whims, they were deliberate acts of devotion, encoding nature's blueprints into stone to honor the divine logic of creation. Even simple shapes held profound meaning. The circle, representing eternity in Norse myths of the serpent Jörmungandr encircling the world, also appears in Celtic knots and Buddhist mandalas as a symbol of infinite cycles. The Vesica Piscis, two overlapping circles forming an almond shape, was sacred to early Christians as the measure of the fish, but its precise geometry was used by Gothic architects to design cathedrals with perfect acoustics. These shapes weren't just decorative, they were diagrams of harmony where myth and math converged to reveal universal truths. What's most striking is how these numerical myths transcended cultures. The Chinese Lo Shu Square, a 3x3 magic grid where numbers sum to 15 in every direction, was said to have been revealed on the back of a turtle from the Luo River. Yet nearly identical squares appear in Islamic mysticism and even the Hebrew Kabbalah's tree of life, all sharing the same reverence for balanced proportions. The Mayan calendar's 20-day cycles and 13 layers of heaven weren't arbitrary. They reflected a base 20 counting system tied to fingers and toes, turning the human body into a living calculator of sacred time. This mathematical mysticism didn't just describe the visible world, it mapped the unseen. Plato's Timaeus imagined the universe as 5 perfect solids, their angles governing the elements, earth as a cube, fire as a tetrahedron. Norse myths spoke of Yggdrasil's 9 realms arranged in 3 tiers, a cosmic fractal echoing the threefold divisions of Celtic triskels or the Hindu trimurti. These weren't fantasy, they were frameworks, attempts to quantify the intangible using the only language precise enough, numbers disguised as gods, ratios hidden in rituals. As we follow these numerical breadcrumbs through myth, we arrive at a startling realization. Our ancestors didn't separate calculation from contemplation. To them, a circle wasn't just a shape, it was a story. A spiral wasn't just a curve, it was a hymn. And in their sacred maps of the unseen world, where geometry met the divine, they left us a challenge to see beyond the symbols and discover the universal language they knew all along. Long before compasses or satellites, mythology served as humanity's original navigation system, a celestial GPS woven from stars and stories. The Polynesians didn't just sail blindly across the Pacific. They followed the star path of Maui, the demigod who fished up islands from the deep. His myth wasn't merely entertainment, it was a nautical chart. Each constellation in his story corresponded to real island groups, while the kavanga, or steering stars, acted as waypoints. When oral traditions spoke of Hokulea, the star of joy, they weren't naming a random twinkle. They were pinpointing Arcturus, the zenith star over Hawaii, a beacon for voyagers. These myths transformed the night sky into a grid of narrative landmarks, where every hero and creature marked a course. The Norse took a different approach, encoding oceanography into epic poetry. The saga of Eric the Red doesn't just recount adventures, it documents the Greenland current's icy flow and the seasonal winds that could carry a longship from Norway to Vinland. When Skalds sang of the whirlpool kraken, they weren't inventing monsters, they were warning of the maelstrom off Norway's coast, where tides collide with terrifying force. Even Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, striking giants in the east, may have mirrored the thunderstorms common along Baltic trade routes. These stories weren't just colorful metaphors, they were survival manuals where every mythical creature symbolized a real maritime hazard. Now consider the Argonauts' quest for the Golden Fleece, often dismissed as pure fantasy, but trace their route from Greece to Colchis on the Black Sea, and you'll find it mirrors ancient tin trade paths. The clashing rocks they narrowly escaped, likely the Bosphorus Strait's treacherous currents, where opposing flows create the illusion of colliding cliffs. Medea's potions, said to grant invincibility, probably referenced local medicinal plants like Colchicum autumnale, used for gout. Every supernatural element in the tale collapses into practical knowledge when viewed through the lens of navigation and resource gathering. What's revolutionary about these mythological maps is their universality. Aboriginal songlines crisscross Australia, each melody encoding topographic details where to find waterholes, which rock formations mark safe passages. The Inuit legend of Sedna, the sea goddess whose hair becomes seals, doubles as a lesson in reading ice flows for hunting grounds. Even the Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh includes precise descriptions of the cedar forest's location, now identified as the Amanus Mountains in Turkey, rich with timber for shipbuilding. This pragmatic blend of myth and geography reveals something profound. Our ancestors didn't separate science from storytelling. They compressed entire libraries of survival data into memorable narratives, ensuring knowledge could outlast empires. Today, modern oceanographers still consult Polynesian star compasses for insights into Pacific currents. while geologists study flood myths like Deucalions in Greece or Manus in India for clues about ancient tsunamis. These stories were never just tales, they were the original augmented reality, overlaying the physical world with layers of meaning and memory. Now, imagine standing on a storm-lashed Viking longship or a Polynesian outrigger canoe, with no instruments but the stars above and the stories in your heart. That's when the truth hits. Mythology wasn't humanity's first attempt at science. It was science's first successful experiment in immortality. By wrapping facts in legend, our ancestors ensured their wisdom would sail far beyond the horizon of their own lifetimes. And as we'll see next, this same narrative ingenuity allowed them to predict disasters with uncanny accuracy, turning myths into early warning systems written in the language of gods and heroes. Prophecies embedded in ancient myths often read like forgotten weather reports or geological bulletins. Take the Native American thunderbird, a colossal raptor whose wing beats were said to summon storms. This wasn't just poetic imagination, it was a brilliant way to encode meteorological patterns. When elders spoke of the thunderbird appearing before torrential rains, they were passing down generations of observed correlations between seasonal wind shifts and approaching storms. Similarly, the Greek belief that Poseidon's trident striking the earth caused earthquakes and tsunamis may sound like fantasy, but modern seismology confirms that many Mediterranean seismic events do follow underwater fault lines, exactly where a god of the sea might strike. These stories were more than folklore, they were oral databases of environmental cues. One of the most striking examples comes from Australia, where Aboriginal stories describe coastal landscapes that vanished underwater thousands of years ago. The Gunditjmara people's tale of a great flood swallowing their ancestral lands aligns uncannily with scientific evidence of sea level rise after the last ice age. Researchers have even matched details in these oral traditions to submerged archaeological sites, proving these weren't just metaphors, they were preserved memories of real events. Similarly, the Cherokee legend of the Octina, a giant serpent whose emergence foretold disasters, likely originated from observations of earthquake precursors like unusual animal behavior or groundwater changes. What's remarkable is how globally consistent these mythic warnings were. In Japan, the Namezu, a giant catfish said to thrash beneath the islands, explained earthquakes centuries before plate tectonics was understood. Norse myths described Fimbulwinter, an endless winter preceding apocalypse, which climatologists now link to volcanic winters caused by eruptions like the one in Iceland around 5,300 years ago. Even the biblical story of Joseph's 7 years of plenty followed by 7 of famine mirrors the cyclical drought patterns of the ancient Near East, verified by tree ring studies. These narratives did more than record events, they taught survival strategies. The Maori story of Tohaki climbing to the heavens to retrieve storm-controlling knowledge wasn't just a hero's journey, it encoded techniques for reading cloud formations. When Andean myths warned that Pachamama, Earth Mother, grew restless before landslides, they were reinforcing the importance of avoiding unstable slopes during rainy seasons. This wasn't superstition, it was sophisticated risk assessment disguised as theology. Modern science is now catching up to these ancient insights. Geologists study tsunami stones along Japan's coast, centuries-old markers placed at high water lines based on ancestral warnings. Ecologists consult indigenous fire myths to improve forest management, recognizing that stories of Prometheus or the Aboriginal fire beings preserved controlled burning practices lost to industrialization. The line between myth and manual blurs further when you realize that the Greek oracle at Delphi may have prophesied while standing over ethylene gas seeps, a natural intoxicant now known to induce trances and heighten sensory perception. This predictive power hints at something profound. Our ancestors weren't just storytellers. They were the first scientists, carefully observing nature's patterns and encoding them in narratives that could outlast written records. Their myths weren't attempts to explain the unknown. They were time capsules of hard-won knowledge, wrapped in symbols to ensure survival. When a Pacific Islander legend describes the ocean swallowing islands generations before an actual tsunami, or when a Viking saga mentions the sun dimming years before a volcanic winter, we're not seeing lucky guesses. We're witnessing the birth of data science, where every symbol held a lesson and every metaphor carried a warning. The true magic of these stories isn't their fantasy, it's their frightening accuracy. Now consider how this changes our understanding of ancient cultures. They didn't live in a world of chaos and guesswork. They navigated their environment with precision, turning observations into oral algorithms that predicted disasters, mapped seasons, and ensured survival. Their myths were the original artificial intelligence pattern recognition systems distilled into narrative, refined over millennia, and proven right by modern science. As we'll see next, this same tradition of encoded knowledge extends beyond earthly phenomena, reaching into the stars themselves. The flood myths echoing across continents aren't just coincidental tales. They're humanity's first attempt to process trauma on a planetary scale. From the Mesopotamian story of Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh to the Haida people's legend of Raven releasing the waters, these narratives share eerie similarities: divine warnings, surviving pairs of animals, and mountains piercing receding waters. But what's truly fascinating isn't just their consistency, it's how modern geology confirms these events. Sediment cores from the Black Sea reveal a sudden inundation around 5,600 years ago, when melting glaciers caused the Mediterranean to burst through the Bosporus, swallowing settlements. Aboriginal stories in Australia describe coastlines that vanished under rising seas, details matching sea level data from the end of the last ice age. These weren't just stories, they were survival memories etched into cultural DNA. Yet floods weren't the only disasters preserved in myth. The Greek tale of Phaethon, who lost control of the sun chariot and scorched the earth, mirrors evidence of a massive solar flare around 3,200 years ago that left carbon-14 spikes in tree rings worldwide. The Hindu legend of the god Shiva drinking poison to save the universe may symbolize volcanic winters where ash clouds blotted out the sun. Even the biblical plagues of Egypt align with climatological studies of the Nile's erratic behavior during the late Bronze Age collapse. What emerges is a pattern. Ancient cultures didn't just witness catastrophes, they transformed them into allegories, making the unthinkable comprehensible through symbolism. This psychological genius reveals itself in the details. Notice how flood myths almost universally feature a survivor, a Noah, a Manu, a Deucalion who rebuilds civilization. These archetypes weren't just heroes, they were psychological anchors, assuring listeners that even in annihilation, renewal was possible. The Babylonian Atrahasis epic frames the flood as divine punishment for humanity's noise, a metaphor for societal collapse. The Maori story of Tohaki climbing the heavens to restore light after a great deluge mirrors the stages of grief, destruction, struggle, and eventual recovery. These narratives didn't just record events, they provided frameworks for resilience, teaching future generations how to endure the unendurable. Modern psychology calls this post-traumatic growth, the ability to find meaning after disaster. Ancient cultures understood it instinctively. When the Klamath people described the eruption of Mount Mazama forming Crater Lake as a battle between sky god Lau and earth goddess Skell, they weren't just explaining geology, they were processing collective trauma through metaphor. The same applies to the Icelandic Eldgjá eruption of 939, preserved in the apocalyptic Völuspá poem, which wove environmental catastrophe into a cosmic prophecy of rebirth. By encoding disasters as myths, our ancestors turned helplessness into narrative control, transforming victims into witnesses whose stories could outlast the very landscapes they mourned. What's striking is how these myths still serve us today. When tsunami survivors in Indonesia recounted legends of the ocean goddess Nai, Iroro Kidul withdrawing her waters before striking, a phenomenon modern science recognizes as drawback waves, they were drawing on centuries-old warning systems. Climate researchers now study flood myths as oral climate proxies, recognizing that the Yupik story of the Great Shaking aligns with seismic records of Alaska's 1700 megathrust earthquake. These stories were never just folklore, they were the original disaster preparedness manuals written in the indelible ink of human memory. So the next time you hear an ancient flood myth, listen closer. Beneath the supernatural veneer lies something extraordinary, a testament to human ingenuity in the face of catastrophe, a bridge between the terror of the past and the hope of the future. These stories remind us that mythology wasn't humanity's first science, it was our first therapy, a way to make sense of a world where the very ground beneath our feet could betray us, and the sky itself might weep fire. And in that shared struggle to find meaning in chaos, we discover the timeless truth. The stories we tell about survival are what make survival possible. Carl Jung wasn't just studying myths, he was decoding the operating system of the human mind. When he described recurring archetypes like the hero, the shadow, or the wise old man, he recognized something profound. These weren't just storytelling tropes, but psychological blueprints wired into our collective unconscious. The Greek myth of Narcissus staring endlessly at his reflection isn't merely a cautionary tale, it's a 2,000-year-old mirror held up to modern narcissism and social media obsession. The story's warning about the dangers of self-absorption transcends time because it speaks to something fundamental in human nature, something ancient cultures understood instinctively long before clinical psychology gave it a name. Freud saw this same timeless truth in the tragedy of Oedipus, where a man unknowingly kills his father and marries his mother. The so-called Oedipus complex might seem like a controversial theory today, but strip away the Freudian baggage and you'll find a deeper truth. Myths like these reveal universal tensions in family dynamics, power struggles between generations, and the painful process of self-discovery. The Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh explores grief so raw. When Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh's lamentation and desperate quest for immortality, that it could be a case study in modern bereavement therapy. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were early attempts to map the labyrinth of human emotions, using narrative as a guide rope through the darkness. Nowhere is this psychological insight more striking than in Hindu and Buddhist traditions. The story of the Buddha sitting beneath the Bodhi tree, confronting the demon Mara's illusions, reads like a masterclass in cognitive behavioral therapy. Ancient texts like the Yoga Sutras describe meditation techniques focusing on breath, observing thoughts without attachment, that neuroscience now confirms reduce amygdala activity and enhance prefrontal cortex function. Tibetan dream yoga practices, where practitioners learn to maintain awareness during sleep, anticipate modern lucid dreaming research by centuries. These weren't mystical mumbo-jumbo, they were sophisticated mental technologies, preserved in mythic language because psychology hadn't yet invented clinical terminology. Even fairy tales functioned as early therapeutic tools. The Brothers Grimm's Hansel and Gretel isn't just about abandoned children outsmarting a witch. It's a symbolic roadmap for navigating trauma, resourcefulness in crisis, and the bittersweet process of leaving childhood behind. The widespread motif of shape-shifting animals in Native American and African folklore, a profound exploration of identity fluidity and the masks we wear in different social contexts. Every culture's mythology contains these psychological fingerprints, showing how our ancestors grappled with anxiety, desire, and the search for meaning using the only tools they had, metaphor and narrative. This psychological thread weaves through mythology's influence on early technology too. The myth of Daedalus crafting wings to escape Crete wasn't just fantasy. It was an early thought experiment about human flight, blending imagination with observations of bird anatomy. When the Norse god Thor rode his chariot pulled by goats, the description of sparks flying from their hooves mirrors later depictions of early steam engines. These stories weren't just flights of fancy, they were the first blueprints, mental models that allowed humanity to leap from what is to what could be. The line between psychology and innovation blurs when you realize that every great invention begins as a story we tell ourselves about the possible. What's truly remarkable is how these ancient psychological insights anticipated modern discoveries. The Greek concept of catharsis, emotional purification through drama, foreshadowed modern trauma therapy's emphasis on narrative healing. The Aboriginal practice of dadiri, deep listening to country and community, aligns perfectly with contemporary mindfulness research. Even the biblical story of Job's suffering and existential questioning reads like a precursor to logotherapy, Viktor Frankl's psychological approach to finding meaning in adversity. Our ancestors didn't have fMRI machines or clinical studies, but they had something equally powerful: stories that distilled generations of observational wisdom about what makes us human. As we turn from the mind to the machines it created, remember this: every technological leap begins as a psychological breakthrough. The courage to imagine the impossible, the resilience to fail and try again, the vision to see beyond present limitations. These are the real gifts mythology bestowed upon innovation. The same archetypes that helped ancient people understand their inner worlds became the templates for reshaping the outer one. Daedalus strapping wings of wax and feathers to his son Icarus wasn't just a tragic fable, it was humanity's first engineering schematic. That myth, born over 3,000 years ago, didn't just warn against hubris. It captured the universal dream of flight centuries before Leonardo da Vinci sketched his ornithopter. The same impulse appears in the Hindu epic Ramayana, where the monkey god Hanuman leaps across oceans, foreshadowing the principles of aerodynamics. These stories weren't mere fantasy. They were mental prototypes, blueprints whispered across generations until technology caught up with imagination. Now consider Vulcan's forge, where the Roman god shaped weapons for deities in a furnace hotter than mortal flames. This wasn't just poetic license, it anticipated metallurgical breakthroughs. When Homer described Achilles' shield as unbreakable, he might have been echoing early experiments with iron alloys that would later give us steel. The Chinese legend of the mechanical horse, a self-moving automaton gifted to emperors, mirrors 3rd century engineer Ma Jun's actual south-pointing chariot, an early gyroscopic compass. Even the Norse Mjolnir, Thor's hammer that always returned to his hand, prefigured magnetic forces and boomerang physics. What's astonishing is how precisely some myths mapped future inventions. Sanskrit texts describe Vimana's flying machines with mercury vortex engines that suspiciously resemble modern ion propulsion systems. The Greek Tolos, a bronze automaton guarding Crete, could be the earliest conceptual robot. And when African Yoruba myths speak of Ogun, the god who forged the first tools from meteoritic iron, they're preserving the historical moment humans transitioned from stone to metal, a technological leap wrapped in divinity. These stories reveal a pattern. Innovation begins as fiction. Before the Wright brothers, there were Persian legends of King Kavus attaching eagles to his throne to soar the skies. Before submarines, Polynesian heroes like Moi dove to the ocean floor in gourd vessels. The line between myth and invention blurs because both spring from the same source, human curiosity pushing against the boundaries of the possible. Ancient storytellers didn't just entertain, they incubated ideas, transforming what if into what will be through generations of retelling. This visionary tradition continues today. The communicators in Star Trek inspired flip phones, just as Jules Verne's moon cannon foreshadowed spaceflight. The difference, we've swapped campfire tales for science fiction, but the principle remains. Every transformative technology lives first in stories. As we turn from machines to the natural world, we'll discover how animal myths served as humanity's first biology textbooks, where dragons taught anatomy and serpents revealed the secrets of medicine. Animals in mythology weren't just characters, they were nature's first professors, teaching through symbolism what science would later confirm. Take the phoenix, that radiant bird reborn from its own ashes. Across cultures from ancient Egypt to China, this myth encoded a profound biological truth, the cyclical renewal of ecosystems after fire. Modern ecology shows how certain plant seeds only germinate in scorched earth, how forests rely on periodic burns to thrive, concepts our ancestors captured in a single, blazing metaphor. Even the dragon, feared in the West but revered in China as a bringer of rain, personified the water cycle long before hydrology diagrams. When Chinese texts described dragons controlling rivers and monsoons, they were observing the connection between seasonal rains and agricultural survival, wrapping meteorology in scales and whiskers. Now consider Bastet, the Egyptian cat goddess worshipped for protection. This wasn't arbitrary. Cats were sacred because they controlled vermin that threatened grain stores, a fact modern archaeology confirms through rat bones found near temple granaries. The Greeks had their own version with Athena's owl, symbolizing wisdom not just because of its solemn gaze, but because owls hunted crop, destroying rodents under moonlight, safeguarding harvest. These deities weren't fantasies, they were reflections of real ecological partnerships, where humans recognized their dependence on other species long before the term keystone species entered biology textbooks. Native American coyote stories take this further, blending humor with hard science. In Navajo tradition, coyotes' chaotic tricks often backfire, teaching that disrupting nature's balance brings consequences. Modern wildlife studies reveal how coyotes actually regulate ecosystems. Their hunting prevents overgrazing by deer, which protects plant diversity. Similarly, the Haida raven myths of the Pacific Northwest describe the bird stealing sunlight, a poetic nod to how ravens disperse seeds, literally bringing light to forests by enabling new growth. These tales weren't just entertainment, they were oral field guides preserving generations of wildlife observation in memorable narratives. Even more astonishing is how myths anticipated animal intelligence science is only now verifying. The Hindu god Ganesha's elephant head symbolizes wisdom and memory, traits modern research confirms, with elephants demonstrating self-awareness, grief, and problem-solving. West African Anansi, the spider, whose webs trap prey and outwit predators, mirrors recent discoveries about spider silk strength and the sophisticated hunting strategies of jumping spiders. When the Norse revered Odin's ravens Hugin and Munin as carriers of knowledge, they were recognizing Corvid's actual tool use and communication skills, documented in contemporary ethology. This symbolic science reveals something profound. Our ancestors didn't just live alongside animals, they learned from them. Every creature in mythology, from the trickster rabbit to the wise tortoise, was a lens for understanding nature's patterns. The Maya's feathered serpent Kukulkan wasn't merely a deity, it embodied the connection between earth and sky, much like real snakes' sensitivity to seismic shifts or birds' navigation by stars. These stories created a shared language between species where wolves taught loyalty, ants taught industry, and whales taught the mysteries of the deep. As we move from the natural world to the realm of human expression, consider how this symbolic language shaped communication itself. Just as animal myths encoded biology, storytelling conventions became the scaffolding for language development, where every metaphor and archetype served as cognitive tools for sharing complex ideas across generations. The transition from observing nature to articulating its wonders marks one of humanity's greatest leaps, and it all began with the stories we told about the creatures around us. Long before dictionaries or grammar rules, myths whispered the secrets of language into being. The Tower of Babel isn't just a biblical tale of divine punishment, it's humanity's first exploration of how communication shapes society. When the story describes a single language fracturing into countless tongues, it mirrors what linguists now call language divergence, where dialects evolve over time into distinct languages. The Norse took a different approach. Odin didn't just give runes to humanity. He hung himself from Yggdrasil for 9 nights to steal their power, a metaphor for the painful process of mastering written symbols. These myths weren't fantasy, they were ancient observations about the transformative and sometimes chaotic power of words. Now consider Sanskrit, revered as the language of the gods not for its beauty alone, but for its mathematical precision. Every syllable in the Vedas was engineered with specific mouth positions and breath control, creating vibrations ancient priests believed could manifest reality. Modern linguists discovered something astonishing: the phonetic patterns of Sanskrit match the harmonic frequencies that stabilize DNA in quantum biology models. The Hindu belief that chanting mantras could heal wasn't superstition. It was an early intuition of how sound waves interact with matter. Even the Greek myth of Hermes inventing language with his caduceus staff hints at this connection. The serpent coils symbolizing the double helix of DNA intertwined with the power of speech. Myths also served as linguistic arcs, preserving endangered dialects against the tides of time. The Maori creation chant, Ko Tipu, begins with the void before creation, but its real magic lies in its structure. Each line builds upon the last using archaic grammatical forms no longer spoken. Similarly, the Navajo Dene Bahane adjective origin story contains verb conjugations found nowhere else, linguistic fossils that help anthropologists reconstruct lost languages. When the Cherokee Sequoyah created his syllabary in the early 19th century, he drew inspiration from ancient petroglyphs, proof that mythic symbols never truly die, they just wait to be rediscovered. This interplay between myth and language reveals something profound. Stories didn't just describe the world, they shaped how we think about it. The Inuit have dozens of words for snow, each describing specific conditions critical for survival. Their myths about Sela, the spirit of the air, encode this linguistic precision, teaching that careful observation leads to precise language, and precise language leads to better survival. The Aboriginal concept of dadiri, deep listening, isn't just a spiritual practice but a linguistic one, emphasizing how certain truths can only be conveyed through silence and nuance. As we turn from words to melodies, remember this: every myth about language was also a theory about vibration, rhythm, and the music hidden in speech. The same cultures that wove phonetic wisdom into stories also encoded musical science into their sacred songs, where the boundary between myth and mathematics dissolves into harmony. Orpheus didn't just play his lyre to charm beasts and bend trees. He was demonstrating an ancient understanding of resonance, the invisible force that shapes everything from music to matter. Greek myths claimed his melodies could move stones, a poetic truth modern physics confirms. Sound waves at specific frequencies can indeed rearrange particles, a principle now harnessed in everything from ultrasound tech to levitating objects with acoustic traps. Apollo's hymns weren't merely divine entertainment. They followed precise musical modes that mirrored planetary orbits, a concept revived centuries later by Kepler's harmony of the spheres. These stories weren't metaphors, they were manuals, teaching that harmony governed both art and cosmos. Take Pythagoras, whose legendary visit to a blacksmith shop revealed the secrets of musical intervals. The myth says he noticed hammers of different weights produced harmonious notes when struck, leading him to discover the mathematical ratios behind octaves and fifths. What sounds like folklore is actually acoustics in disguise. The same weight-to-pitch relationships now underpin piano tuning and guitar frets. Hindu traditions took this further, designing ragas not just for beauty but for function. The Megh Malhar raga, sung to summon rain, wasn't superstition. It exploited specific frequencies that resonate with water vapor, a phenomenon modern cymatics visualizes as intricate geometric patterns forming in liquid under sound vibrations. This fusion of myth and music extended to architecture. Gregorian chants in Gothic cathedrals weren't random. Their reverberations matched the building's resonant frequencies, creating standing waves that made whispers audible across vaulted ceilings. The Navajo still use sound caves, where shamans chant into stone walls to amplify certain tones, a practice acousticians now recognize as early manipulation of sonic reflection. Even the didgeridoo's drone, central to Aboriginal Dreamtime stories, produces vibrations that synchronize brainwaves, explaining its millennia-old role in healing rituals. What's revolutionary is how these sonic myths anticipated modern science. Tibetan singing bowls said to align energy, create vibrations that reduce stress hormones, a fact verified by cortisol studies. The Greek legend of the siren's deadly songs mirrors infrasound, frequencies below human hearing that can induce nausea or dread, used today in crowd-controlled devices. From bone flutes carved 40,000 years ago to the precise intervals of Chinese temple bells, our ancestors weren't just making music, they were reverse engineering the universe's hidden frequencies. Now consider the kitchen as the next laboratory. Just as myths preserved acoustic science, culinary legends encoded food chemistry, where the alchemy of fermentation, the precision of spice blends, and the rituals of cooking held secrets modern gastronomy is only now decoding. The line between recipe and relic blurs when you realize that every loaf of sourdough, every barrel of aged wine, carries echoes of ancient edible wisdom. Culinary myths served as humanity's first nutrition labels, wrapped in stories too delicious to forget. Take ambrosia, the divine nectar Greek gods consumed for immortality. It wasn't just fantasy. Historians trace its ingredients to honey, fermented fruits, and herbs like myrtle, all packed with antioxidants and antimicrobial properties we now know promote longevity. Dionysus didn't just throw wild wine parties. His rituals preserved the science of fermentation, where grape must transformed into preservable, probiotic-rich wine, a process as vital for ancient health as refrigeration is today. Even the biblical forbidden fruit, often depicted as an apple, might have been pomegranate, a superfood revered in Mesopotamian myths for its heart-healthy polyphenols. These stories weren't random, they were dietary commandments disguised as folklore. The Mediterranean diet, celebrated by modern nutritionists, was codified in myth long before it hit clinical studies. Athena's sacred olive trees provided more than symbolic wisdom. Their oil, central to Greek cuisine, carried anti-inflammatory benefits that reduced atherosclerosis risk. The story of Persephone's 6 pomegranate seeds binding her to the underworld, a poetic warning about seasonal eating. Pomegranates ripen in autumn, their iron-rich arrows ideal for winter nourishment. Chinese legends are just as precise. The god Shennong, who tasted hundreds of herbs, documented ginger's digestive aids and ginseng's adaptogenic properties centuries before clinical trials confirmed them. Every culture's food myths followed this pattern: edible wisdom wrapped in narrative, ensuring survival. Knowledge outlasted empires. Nowhere is this culinary coding more striking than in Ayurveda, where Hindu myths describe turmeric as the golden goddess purifying the body. Modern labs isolated curcumin, its active compound, proving its power to reduce inflammation and even combat neurodegenerative diseases. The Norse weren't far behind. Their mead, drunk by warriors for strength, harnessed honey's natural antibiotics and yeast's B vitamins. Even the Mayan maize god's resurrection myth encoded nixtamalization, the alkali process that unlocks corn's nutrients, preventing pellagra in communities dependent on corn. These weren't just recipes, they were biochemical breakthroughs dressed as deities. But myths didn't just preserve dietary dose, they warned of don'ts. The Jewish prohibition against pork wasn't arbitrary. In hot climates, undercooked pork bred trichinosis, a deadly parasite, the Polynesian demigod Maui's fatal mistake. Cooking food for the goddess of death, a metaphor for improper food handling causing illness. Every taboo, from fasting protocols in Aboriginal walkabouts to the Jain principle of ahimsa, avoiding meat, carried ecological and physiological wisdom. Today's research validates these ancient intuitions. Intermittent fasting mirrors circadian rhythms. Plant-based diets reduce chronic disease risks, proving that mythic food laws were early public health campaigns. This brings us to the body itself, where myths didn't just describe nourishment, they mapped anatomy. The Egyptian god Thoth didn't just invent writing. His ibis-headed form mirrored the brain's ventricles, later confirmed by neuroanatomy. The serpent Kundalini in Hindu texts coils at the base of the spine like the vagus nerve, our body's information superhighway. Even the Greek Hydra, regrowing 2 heads when one was cut, foreshadowed the discovery of stem cells' regenerative power. Our ancestors didn't need MRI machines, they had metaphors, turning the body's mysteries into stories that guided both healers and the healed. As we peel back these layers, a profound truth emerges: myths were never just stories. They were the original interdisciplinary textbooks, blending gastronomy, medicine, and physics into narratives sticky enough to survive millennia. The next time you sprinkle turmeric or sip wine, remember, you're not just following a recipe. You're participating in a mythic tradition where every bite carries the weight of ancient wisdom, and every meal is a communion with the past. The human body wasn't just flesh and bone to ancient cultures. It was a living cosmos, mapped in myth long before scalpels revealed its secrets. Take the Hindu chakra system, where swirling energy centers aligned along the spine weren't mere spiritual symbols. Modern neurology reveals these correspond almost precisely with major nerve plexuses. The root chakra at the coccyx mirrors the sacral plexus governing survival instincts, while the crown chakra aligns with the brain's pineal gland, our biological light sensor. The serpent Kundalini rising through these channels, a poetic depiction of cerebrospinal fluid's rhythmic flow, now known to wash the brain during deep sleep cycles. Egyptian embalmers took a more visceral approach. Their canopic jars guarded organs under the watch of 4 deities, but this wasn't arbitrary symbolism. Imseti protected the liver, now recognized as our detox center. Hapi guarded the lungs, Duamutef the stomach, and Kebesenuf the intestines, each organ paired with a god reflecting its function. The Book of the Dead describes the heart being weighed against Mat's feather, a metaphor modern cardiology echoes. The heart's electromagnetic field extends several feet beyond the body, literally interacting with the environment like a cosmic scale. Even their mummification techniques preserved antibacterial knowledge, using natron salts that science now confirms halt decomposition by dehydrating tissues and inhibiting bacterial growth. Greek medicine wove anatomy into legend through the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile, each governing temperament and health. Hippocrates didn't invent this system. He codified what myths had hinted at for centuries. The melancholic personality linked to black bile finds eerie resonance in modern gut-brain axis research, where microbiome imbalances correlate with depression. Their belief that bloodletting restored balance seems barbaric today, yet phlebotomy persists in treating hemochromatosis, proving even their most malign practices held kernels of physiological truth. Nowhere is this bridge between myth and medicine more striking than in India's surgical lore. The story of Ganesha receiving an elephant's head after his own was lost reads like proto-transplant mythology, but the Sushruta Samhita, dating to 600 BC, describes actual rhinoplasty techniques using cheek flaps. Ayurvedic texts detail cataract surgery with curved needles and hernia repairs, procedures European medicine wouldn't master for millennia. Even the epic Mahabharata's tale of Karna's birth armor, fused to his skin, parallels modern knowledge of congenital dermal conditions like cutis aplasia. These myths did more than explain, they guided hands. The Aztecs depicted their healing goddess Ixtlilton holding obsidian blades, the same tools archaeologists find in cranial trepanation sites where surgeons relieved intracranial pressure. Chinese acupuncture maps mirror embryological nerve development stages, suggesting ancient anatomists observed fetal growth patterns. When Nordic sagas described Odin trading an eye for wisdom at Mimir's well, they preserved observations about the optic nerve's direct brain connection, the sacrificed eye symbolizing inward vision awakening. What emerges is astonishingly consistent. Cultures separated by continents and centuries arrived at similar insights about the body's inner workings. The Aboriginal songlines describing ropes connecting organs anticipate fascia research, revealing how connective tissue networks influence whole body health. Cherokee myths of the little people mending bones with songs align with today's ultrasound bone stimulators using sound waves to accelerate healing. Every civilization's anatomical myths formed a collective biopsy of human understanding, slicing through time to reveal how intuitively our ancestors grasped the body's mysteries. This mythic anatomy lives on in our language. When we call someone phlegmatic or say grief strikes the heart, we're speaking in humors and hieroglyphs without realizing it. Medical symbols from the caduceus to the pharmacy's bowl of Hygeia carry these ancient insights forward, reminding us that every MRI scan and gene therapy trial stands on the shoulders of storytellers who saw divinity in diaphragm muscles and poetry in pulse points. As we turn from the body's inner rhythms to the sky's ever-changing moods, remember this: just as myths mapped our anatomy, they also charted atmospheric patterns with uncanny precision. The same cultures that envisioned energy channels in the spine, read storms in thunderbird wings, and predicted floods from serpent dreams, proving that mythology was never just about explaining the world, but about learning to listen to it. Thor's hammer didn't just summon lightning, it encoded the physics of atmospheric discharge. Across cultures, smith gods like Hephaestus or the West African Ogun weren't merely crafting weapons, they were preserving metallurgical breakthroughs in allegory. The Norse legend of Mjolnir, forged in a dwarf's furnace with collapsing bellows, mirrors real crucible steel techniques where controlled oxygen flow determines metal strength. Hindu texts describe the Vajra as unbreakable, a quality modern metallurgists achieve through quenching rapidly cooling heated metal to lock in durability. These myths weren't just colorful tales, they were trade secrets disguised as divine gifts, protecting advanced craftsmanship from rivals. Take the Celtic god Goibniu, whose magical forge produced unbreakable spears. Archaeologists now recognize this as early case hardening, where iron is packed in charcoal and heated to create a carbon-rich outer layer. The Japanese sword-making ritual of folding steel 1,000 times, attributed to the kami spirits, wasn't just ceremony. It distributed impurities evenly, creating the legendary sharpness of katana blades. Even the biblical story of Tubal-Cain, the first metalsmith, hints at the revolutionary shift from stone to bronze when adding tin to copper produced harder alloys. Every anvil strike in mythology carried practical knowledge, from tempering temperatures to alloy ratios, wrapped in the mystique of divine craftsmanship. The most striking example comes from the Damascus steel of ancient Syria, whose water-patterned blades could slice through lesser metals. Islamic legends said these swords were quenched in dragon's blood, a poetic cover for the real secret. Trace elements of vanadium and tungsten from Indian ores, creating microscopic carbon nanotubes that gave the steel its flexibility and edge. When European smiths lost this technique during the Middle Ages, the magic of Damascus steel became myth until modern electron microscopes rediscovered its nanotechnology. Similarly, the Chinese credited their bronze casting mastery to the goddess Nu, was 5 colored stones, but archaeological evidence shows they were systematically testing copper-tin lead ratios, creating the earliest known metallurgical experiments. These smith god stories reveal a pattern. Ancient metalworkers didn't just stumble upon techniques, they systematically tested and recorded them. The Finnish Kalevala epic describes the wizard-smith Ilmarinen forging the Sampo, a magical device that grinds out prosperity. Scholars now believe this myth preserved knowledge of water-powered trip hammers, which revolutionized ore processing. When West African tales speak of Ogun's iron-transforming society, they're documenting the actual transition from stone tools to iron agriculture across the Sahel. Every spark from a mythic hammer carried the glow of innovation, a light our ancestors carefully guarded in stories too valuable to lose. As we move from the forge to the stars, remember this: the same cultures that encoded metallurgy in myth were also mapping celestial patterns with equal precision. The line between earthly metals and cosmic metals blurs when you realize that the gold of the gods wasn't just decoration. It symbolized the understanding that the same elements forged in human furnaces were born in stellar explosions, connecting craftsmanship to cosmology in ways we're only beginning to appreciate. Myth gods didn't just shape metal, they shaped civilizations. Take Hephaestus, the Greek blacksmith deity who crafted palaces for the Olympians. His myth wasn't just about divine architecture. It mirrored the rise of urban metallurgy, where bronze workshops clustered near city centers, fueling trade networks and economic power. Vulcan's Roman forge beneath Mount Etna, a poetic nod to volcanic minerals like sulfur and obsidian, essential for glassmaking and metal purification. These weren't just fiery fairy tales, they were blueprints for industrial zoning, placing foundries near resources while keeping their polluting flames safely distant from homes. The Norse legend of Whale and the Smith takes this further. His underground forge, accessible only through a waterfall, preserved a real technique. Medieval European smiths often built workshops near rivers to harness hydropower for bellows and trip hammers. African traditions reveal even sharper practical wisdom. The Yoruba god Ogun's association with crossroads wasn't random blacksmiths historically settled at village intersections. where their skills could serve farmers, warriors, and traders alike. These myths encoded urban planning principles long before the term existed, blending sacred geography with logistical genius. Archaeology confirms this connection. At Turkey's ancient Hittite capital Hattusa, temple murals depict smith gods alongside detailed city maps showing foundries positioned downwind of residential areas. Chinese texts describe the mythical Yellow Emperor's advisor crafting bronze vessels, where the earth's veins met, later proven to correlate with sites rich in copper and tin deposits. Even the Celtic smith god Goibniu's everlasting feast symbolizes something practical: the communal feasts that bonded metalworkers to other artisans, ensuring stable trade networks essential for urban growth. This mythic urban planning extended beyond workshops. The Hindu Vishvakarma, architect of the gods, didn't just design celestial palaces. His earthly counterparts laid out Harappan cities with precise grid systems and advanced drainage, features echoed in his mythological descriptions. Mesopotamian tales of Enki building the first city from clay tablets mirror the actual use of cuneiform records for land surveys and construction projects. When the Maya spoke of the feathered serpent Kukulkan designing pyramid cities aligned to stars, they preserved astronomical urban planning methods still visible at Chichen Itza's equinox light displays. What's revolutionary is how these stories tackled modern-sounding challenges. The Greek myth of the labyrinth built by Daedalus wasn't just a monster's maze. It reflected ancient Crete's palatial complexes with their winding corridors designed to confuse invaders. African Dogon legends describe the god Nomo planning villages in spiral patterns to maximize shade and airflow, a passive cooling system later studied by architects. Even the biblical Tower of Babel's downfall carried a practical warning about overpopulation and resource strain in early urban centers. Now consider infrastructure. The Roman Vulcanalia festival, where live fish were thrown into fires, seems bizarre until you realize it commemorated using wet leather to shield buildings from forged sparks, an early fire code. Inca myths about the bridge maker god Apu Quintixi Huaraquatra encoded suspension bridge engineering so advanced, their grass fiber designs inspired modern steel cable techniques. Every cobblestone, aqueduct, and city wall in the ancient world carried whispers of these divine blueprints, where myth and municipal planning were inseparable. As we peel back these layers, a startling truth emerges. Our ancestors didn't just build cities, they storied them into existence. The same narratives that preserved alloy recipes also mapped sewer systems. The same smith gods who tempered swords also zoned industrial districts. This wasn't primitive guesswork. It was a holistic vision where every hammer strike shaped both metal and society. And when we walk today through cities with foundry districts or firehouse mascots bearing smith god symbols, we're walking through living myths, proof that the best urban plans aren't just functional but legendary. From the forge's glow to the city's pulse, myths didn't just record progress, they accelerated it. Now, let's see how they tackled an even greater challenge: predicting and surviving nature's fury, where folklore became humanity's first disaster preparedness manual. Romulus plowing his sacred furrow around the Palatine Hill wasn't just drawing a symbolic boundary, he was enacting the world's first zoning law. That legendary founding of Rome, where myth says he traced rectangular city limits with a bronze plow, mirrors the actual Cardo and decumanous grid system found in Roman military camps and colonial towns. The same myth that describes Remus disrespectfully leaping over the furrow encodes early urban planning taboos. Transgressing boundaries threatened both divine and social order. These stories weren't just about sibling rivalry, they were legal contracts written in allegory, establishing principles of land use and civic space that still shape urban policy today. Across the world, Hindu temple towns took this mythic planning even further. The Brihadisvara temple in Thanjavur wasn't just built according to sacred texts, its entire surrounding city radiated outward like a stone mandala, with concentric streets mirroring cosmic diagrams from the Vastu Shastras. Water tanks positioned northeast to catch monsoon winds. That wasn't priestly intuition. It was hydraulic engineering preserved in verses about the rain god Varuna's preferred directions. When myths described gods measuring the universe with strings, they were documenting the actual ropes and pegs used to lay out cities with perfect solar alignments, techniques modern surveyors still study for their uncanny accuracy. What's revolutionary is how these mythic blueprints anticipated modern sustainability challenges. The legendary hanging gardens of Babylon weren't just royal whimsy. Their tiered design created microclimates that reduced urban heat, a principle now revived in green roof architecture. Chinese feng shui myths about dragon veins guiding city placement. They preserved observations about groundwater flows and wind patterns that today's geologists confirm minimize earthquake damage. Even the Aboriginal story of the rainbow serpent carving riverbeds informed settlement patterns, ensuring communities thrived where seasonal floods replenished rather than destroyed. Contemporary architects are now mining these ancient narratives for solutions. When Barcelona's superblocks reduce car traffic by echoing the cell-like neighborhoods of medieval Islamic cities, themselves designed around Quranic descriptions of paradise gardens, they're proving that myths hold timeless urban wisdom. Biomimicry experts study how the lotus-shaped pillars of Khmer temples channel rainwater exactly like the plant's natural drainage system, inspiring self-cleaning building materials. From the wind-catching towers of Persian bajirs revived in Dubai's sustainability projects to the passive cooling courtyards of Spanish colonial homes modeled on Moorish myths of celestial breezes, the past is becoming our most innovative urban design lab. This brings us to timekeeping, where myths didn't just mark hours, they synchronized entire civilizations with cosmic rhythms. The same cultures that wove city planning into legend also encoded celestial mechanics into calendar stories, turning the sky into a clock and gods into its gears. When the Egyptian myth of Nut swallowing the sun each night described a predictable cycle rather than random chaos, it wasn't just poetry, it was an early lesson in the reliability of natural laws, the foundation of all scientific timekeeping. The Mayan long count calendar didn't just mark days, it wove time itself into a grand cosmic story. Their myth of the hero twins descending into the underworld to defeat the lords of death wasn't just an exciting tale. It mirrored the precise cycles of Venus, which appears and disappears in 8-year patterns like a celestial resurrection. When their priests calculated the end of a Bacton, a cycle of 144,000 days, they weren't predicting apocalypse, they were tracking the slow precession of the equinoxes, a 26,000-year wobble in Earth's axis that modern astronomy confirms. Even their calendar round, which synchronized 260-day ritual cycles with 365-day solar years, created a 52-year harmony as reliable as any atomic clock, all wrapped in stories of gods balancing chaos and order. Meanwhile, along the Nile, the Egyptians anchored their chronology to something equally poetic, the Sothic cycle. Their myth of Sopdet, the goddess whose tears caused the Nile to flood, coincided with the heliacal rising of Sirius when the star first becomes visible at dawn after months of absence. This celestial event didn't just inspire poetry, it set their agricultural calendar, signaling the annual inundation that fertilized their fields. By observing that Sirius's return drifted one day every 4 years against their 365-day calendar, they inadvertently documented Earth's quarter-day annual overage, the same discrepancy that later led to our leap year. Their myths turned a star into a celestial stopwatch, blending astronomy with the rhythm of survival. The Chinese zodiac took a different approach, threading time through the personalities of 12 animals. But behind the charming tale of the rat winning the Jade Emperor's race lies a sophisticated lunisolar system. Their 60-year cycle, combining 12 earthly branches with 5 heavenly stems, didn't just track years, it modeled the interplay of Jupiter's 12-year orbit with Saturn's 30-year cycle, creating a temporal harmony that guided everything from imperial coronations to crop rotations. Even the legend of Nuwa repairing the sky with 5 colored stones encodes their 5-phase theory of time, where wood, fire, earth, metal, and water seasons rotate in predictable sequences. What unites these systems is their narrative genius. The Norse didn't just record eclipses, they dramatized them as the wolf's girl nearly catching the sun chariot, a story that helped villagers anticipate these awe-inspiring events without panic. The Hindu yugas, vast ages spanning millions of years, turned geological time into moral allegory, while the Aboriginal Dreamtime mapped generations of ecological knowledge onto songlines that doubled as seasonal calendars. These cultures didn't separate science from storytelling. They understood that humans remember patterns better when they're wrapped in meaning. Nowhere is this clearer than in death myths, where cultures turned mortality into their ultimate scientific experiment. The Egyptian Book of the Dead wasn't just a guide to the afterlife. It was a meticulous preservation manual, with embalming techniques modern chemists have recreated to stunning accuracy. Tibetan sky burial rituals, where vultures dissolve the body into the elements, mirror today's ecological burial movements. Even the Aztec belief that fallen warriors became hummingbirds finds eerie resonance in the physics of energy conversion, the idea that nothing is truly destroyed, only transformed. As we stand at this final frontier between myth and mortality, we realize something profound. Our ancestors didn't just fear death, they studied it. Their stories were hypotheses, their rituals controlled experiments, and their afterlives grand theories about consciousness and the cosmos. In decoding these death myths, we're not just uncovering ancient beliefs, we're rediscovering humanity's first bold steps into the greatest scientific mystery of all. Death myths weren't just about the afterlife, they were humanity's first experiments in consciousness. The Egyptian Book of the Dead reads like an ancient neurology textbook, detailing the soul's journey through 12 hours of darkness before rebirth. But look closer, those hours mirror the stages of hyposic brain activity during cardiac arrest, from tunnel vision to vivid hallucinations, the solar bark carrying Ra through the underworld. Modern near-death studies describe strikingly similar tunnels of light, often reported during oxygen deprivation. And when Osiris weighs hearts against the feather of Mat, it's uncanny how closely it resembles the life reviews described by today's ND survivors, where memories flood the mind in a cascade of emotional reckoning. These weren't fantasies, they were observations recorded in symbols because science lacked the words. Tibetan Buddhism's Bardo Thodol takes it further. This guidebook to dying describes a 49-day transition between death and rebirth, where consciousness navigates dazzling lights and terrifying visions. Neuroscience now recognizes something startling: the brain's gamma wave activity, linked to heightened awareness, can surge post-mortem for minutes, even hours. The Bardo's descriptions of floating above one's body or encountering luminous beings align eerily with terminal lucidity cases, where dementia patients suddenly regain clarity moments before death. Even the peaceful and wrathful deities encountered in the Bardo mirror the brain's dual processing systems, the calming default mode network, and the hyperactive amygdala responses triggered by survival instincts. The Greeks, too, encoded biological truths in their underworld myths. The river Lethe, whose waters caused souls to forget their past lives, might symbolize the brain's glymphatic system recently discovered to flush out toxins during deep sleep, essentially resetting memory pathways. Persephone's cyclical return from Hades mirrors circadian rhythms governing human consciousness, while Orpheus's failed rescue of Eurydice illustrates the brain's struggle to process grief where memories feel just out of reach. Every culture's death mythology follows this pattern: stories that preserved neurological phenomena long before MRI machines could visualize them. What's truly revolutionary is how these myths anticipated quantum theories. Hindu and Buddhist concepts of reincarnation describe consciousness as indestructible energy changing form, a notion that aligns with the first law of thermodynamics, where energy neither dies nor disappears. The Egyptian Ba and Ka, soul components that reunite after death, find echoes in quantum entanglement, where particles remain connected across distances. Even the Aztec belief that fallen warriors become hummingbirds resonates with modern biocentrism's idea that consciousness shapes reality. These parallels suggest ancient cultures intuited truths about consciousness that science is only now verifying. So what does this mean for us today? These myths offer more than comfort, they're invitations to explore. When hospice patients describe seeing deceased loved ones, or cardiac arrest survivors recall precise operating room details despite flatlined brains, we're witnessing the same phenomena once attributed to psychopomp guides and spirit journeys. The boundary between myth and science dissolves further with each discovery about near-death brain activity, quantum coherence in microtubules, or the microbiome's role in consciousness. Perhaps death, like all great mysteries, was never meant to be solved, only explored, through stories that bridge what we know and what we sense. In the end, these myths remind us that science and spirituality were never truly separate. They're two languages describing the same profound truth. Consciousness, in all its forms, is the universe's most enduring mystery. And whether we approach it through particle physics or pyramid texts, we're all part of the same eternal story, one that began with ancient storytellers gazing at the stars and wondering what lies beyond the last breath. The stories our ancestors left behind were never mere entertainment. They were time capsules of wisdom, carefully crafted to survive where brittle parchment and stone tablets might crumble. Think of the Greek myth of Icarus soaring too close to the sun with waxen wings. For centuries, we dismissed it as a simple warning against hubris. But when engineers studied the story through the lens of material science, they realized something astonishing. The tale precisely describes the melting point of beeswax under solar radiation, a detail that would have been critical knowledge for early civilizations experimenting with adhesives and sealants. This wasn't just folklore, it was applied physics disguised as a morality tale. Consider how indigenous Australian songlines encode tens of thousands of years of ecological data within melodies. A single verse about the rainbow serpent might specify the migration patterns of fish, the salinity of waterholes, and the flowering cycles of desert plants, information vital for survival in one of Earth's harshest environments. Modern botanists have verified plant properties described in these songs, discovering that certain mythic remedies for wounds actually contain powerful antibacterial compounds. The Cherokee story of the Octina serpent, with its glowing crystal forehead, once seemed pure fantasy until geologists recognized the description as perfect accounts of Appalachian cave formations where quartz deposits refract sunlight into eerie beams. What's revolutionary about this perspective is how it reshapes our view of ancient cultures. the Dogon people's detailed knowledge of Sirius's invisible companion star wasn't supernatural insight. It was meticulous astronomy preserved through generations of oral tradition. The Norse world tree Yggdrasil, with its roots tapping 3 mystical wells, maps onto the hydrological cycle with uncanny accuracy, showing how water moves between sky, earth, and underground reservoirs. Even the biblical account of Moses striking a rock to release water finds its counterpart in modern desert survival techniques, where specific sedimentary layers indeed hold trapped moisture that can be accessed through precise fracturing. This symbolic language wasn't limited to the natural world. It encoded social technologies too. The Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh includes what might be history's first documented midlife crisis, but buried within its verses are also sophisticated observations about urban psychology and the toll of kingship. The Hawaiian legend of the trickster Kamapua raiding crop stores isn't just a children's story, it's a clever economic lesson about resource hoarding and redistribution, wrapped in the adventures of a shape-shifting boar. Every culture's mythology follows this pattern, practical knowledge dressed in vivid narrative, ensuring the most vital information would be remembered, retold, and revered. As we stand at this crossroads between ancient intuition and modern verification, a thrilling possibility emerges. The greatest discoveries about our past may still lie hidden in plain sight, waiting in stories we thought we knew. The next time you hear an old tale about dragon bones or talking trees, listen closer. That fiction might just be our ancestors' most ingenious way of preserving truth. The real magic of mythology isn't in its fantasy, it's in the startling precision with which it maps onto realities we're only now beginning to measure. And if these connections teach us anything, it's that human ingenuity has always been our most powerful magic, whether wrapped in the language of gods or the equations of science. Now it's your turn. Have you encountered a myth that turned out to hold surprising scientific truth? Share your discoveries below, and let's keep decoding humanity's oldest stories together. For more journeys where legend meets laboratory, don't forget to subscribe and join us as we keep peeling back the layers of history's greatest hidden texts.